Hello, grade 1 teachers. Let's have a look at some ways that you can connect your computer science outcomes into your living systems learning. As you probably already know, the computer science organizing idea talks about computational thinking, design thinking, and creativity. And there's some really easy, natural ways that you can incorporate computational thinking into your living system studies. So if we're looking at the observe and describe similarities and differences between plants and animals, we can see some ways that we can be doing decomposition and pattern recognition while we're also covering this living systems idea. So if we give the students a sort like this, it's got a combination of a bunch of different plants and animals on it, and maybe we're asking them just to sort them in ways that make sense to them, or we've given them the notion of sorting them into plants and animals right off of the hop. Looking at that sort out into the plants and animals, which is the most obvious, also is going to connect to that living systems outcome eventually that you're looking to cover. So we'll just have a look at it this way. So when we're doing this, when the kids are looking at specific attributes of these living things, they are doing that decomposition piece of the computational thinking. By looking at whether something is an animal or a plant, there are specific characteristics that we can look at quickly to define whether it belongs in one or the other category, and other parts of that plant or animal don't matter, like the color or what its purpose is, if it's wild or it's tame. If we're just sorting into animals and plants, we only need to be concerned with those attributes that connect to something being an animal or a plant. And we're decomposing these things and looking at just those attributes that we want to find. And we're also looking at the pattern. So the other piece of computational thinking is that by moving these living things into these two different groups and having conversations about why things are in what group or the other and what attributes make something belong in one group or the other, we're making those patterns. These are things that animals have in common, and these are things that plants have in common, and the other are things that make them different from each other. So that is that computational thinking piece of decomposing and doing some pattern recognition while we're talking about our living systems. With that same sort, when we're still talking about the similarities and differences between plants and animals, we can also touch into the algorithm design piece of computational thinking simply by asking students to create a rule or an algorithm for the sort. So if we've gone further and asked students to sort the plants into food and not food, or they've come up with this themselves on a second sort of one of those. Now we could look at these two categories and ask the students to come up with a rule. Well, how would you know where something belongs? So we have a really simple algorithm rule on the food side. If it is a plant and we eat it, it goes here. If it is a plant and we don't eat it, it goes over on the other side. So that's connecting that algorithm thinking, that computational thinking idea of designing an algorithm, a set of instructions or a rule. That's a really great way that you can connect that in naturally and have those conversations and develop those critical thinking skills along with your living systems stuff. Looking at the skill of being able to represent plants and animals in various environments, again, we'll be looking at that decomposition and pattern recognition piece as we look at the same, how plants and animals have the same basic needs. That's something that defines something that is living. It has those same needs, but plants and different animals will live in different environments, and then we may have conversations about which plants and animals are in which environment. So again, we're looking at different attributes and what it is about these things that make them live in this environment, or how these needs define that is a living thing, decomposing, breaking the plants and animals down, looking at specific parts, and then connecting those sort of patterns. If it needs all of these things, then it is a living thing. And then beyond that, those extra things that we can further categorize and then talk about the differences between the animals and the plants that are in the different ecosystems and environments as well. So that's all naturally doing those first two pieces of the computational thinking when we're just having conversations and doing activities around looking specifically at specific parts of animals or really anything that you're studying outside of specifically computer sciences. With that same representing plants and animals in various environments, we can move into looking at some pattern abstraction and algorithm design when we're covering that as well in a very similar way. So here is another example using the animals where we're sorting into our Venn diagram under the headings of wild and tame. So this is a great example for your students to have conversations about how some animals live in the wild and some are domesticated and tame, and the wild ones take care of themselves, and how there's certain species of animals and types of animals that can be wild or tame, and we can discuss what those have in common and how they are the same and different from specifically tame and specifically wild animals. So we could have the students abstract by asking them to add animals, or whether this is, we could do this activity digitally as I have it here on the slides. These could be little cards that they're working on in front of them. They could be looking at this on your projection, and we could just be orally asking them to share these answers, but asking them to think of other animals that would belong in either part of this Venn diagram is abstracting. And then we can just take it to that next level of the algorithm design by asking them again to think of a rule for how we are sorting here. So I talk a lot about the little kid bots and talking to students about how they are, connecting things that we're doing in the class to that algorithm process, the following of instructions. And those are, the specific skills that you see in the computer science curriculum, is really about following instructions. So anytime you can include that algorithmic sort of thinking, talking about breaking it down, what are the steps for this? How would you tell a computer to do this sort? Or how would you program your parent or your friend to sort these cards? What would be the rules you would write down if they were going to do this without you here? And so then we can land on those rules, that why do we think these things belong here and there? If it is an animal, takes care of itself, it's wild. Animal taken care of by humans, tame. We've defined those rules, and we've also touched on that algorithm piece of the computational thinking. So just looking briefly to finish up at the specific skills and procedures in that computer science curriculum that you have, with those activities that I just went over. We looked at a couple of these really specifically, and I wanted to just draw attention to these again because really, as we get into them, as mentioned, we're talking a lot about following instructions. So while you're doing these sorts or any other type of activity, whether it be in living systems or anything else you're doing throughout your day, just by doing those processes of having students give the instructions back, maybe telling them what they need to accomplish and having them come up with those instructions. So that could be even as it pertains to that sort. Sort them up, figure out a way to sort them, and then figure out how to tell someone else to sort the cards the same way that you did. You would be covering your living systems sort or outcome, and then also covering this computer science outcome. So they're really simple to connect into all of your other things. Those are some quick ways you can attach them to the activities that you'll be doing in living systems and help you keep computer science living throughout your year without too much extra work and planning.